All right, let's get this show on the road, shall we, ladies and gentlemen? Victoria Police are clueless. You know, the rules as outlined by DHHS have been around since last year, so there's really no excuse now for Victoria Police to not understand the rules. People who have a lawful reason for not wearing a face mask, such as a medical condition, do not need to provide some form of official documentation, such as a medical certificate, right? It's an invasion of our privacy. So people who are suffering from conditions such as maybe breathing problems, anxiety, stress, and whatever condition it may be, the reason for them not wearing a mask, they're not required to carry their medical papers on them. And they're not required to produce those papers should somebody like, I don't know, a Victoria Police officer happen to ask for it. But for some reason, Victoria Police, they just didn't get the memo. They were looking the other way. They were at the beach. They were doing something else. They were playing PlayStation and they didn't know about it. So this is a little bit of a catch-up for Victoria Police. So for the Victoria Police officers who watch the show, maybe you could take some notes. All right, I've got a little clip here of an interaction between an individual and a police officer who, for whatever reason, she seemed to think that it was perfectly okay for her to demand a member of the public's medical papers. I'm going to play this for you right now.
Just for my lawyer.
Yeah.
Say that again, please.
So if you've got an exemption, and you can show us your exemption now, you've got a medical exemption, you're free to go. But if you can't show us your medical exemption, we've got no other choice but to believe that you don't have a medical exemption.
Okay. So am I being detained?
So can you show me your medical exemption?
Am I being detained or am I free to leave?
Well, at this stage, we believe that you are committing an offence, failing to comply with the chief.
But am I free to go?
No, you're not at this stage.
So I'm being detained?
Do you have your driver's licence?
I don't, but am I free to leave?
Not at this stage, no.
So I'm being detained?
We need to confirm your ID.
But am I free to leave?
No.
So I'm being detained?
Yes.
Okay.
So do you have your ID?
For what am I being detained?
So we believe that you're committing the offence.
You believe? Have you got...
Mate,
what evidence do you have?
If you just let me talk for a
Sure.
minute without
And
interrupting.
I'm not being hostile, I'm just talking to you nicely.
If you let me just speak
And
for a
I'm
minute.
just recording for my protection.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we're recording
As you are.
too.
Yeah.
So because you can't show us that you've got a medical exemption, we believe that you don't have a medical exemption.
So do you have evidence?
Mate, as I just said.
Sorry, go on.
If you let me talk. So if you can't prove that you've got a medical exemption, we believe that you're committing an offence.
Okay.
And because we believe that you're committing an offence, we need to confirm your identity.
On what grounds do you believe I'm committing an offence?
Because you don't have your ID. I'm not going to go around. I'm not going to keep going around.
But I'm happy to go around because I want clarity.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Can you give us some ID?
I don't have any ID on me.
Well, if you can, we'll take down your ID.
I'd prefer not to, and the reason being, if I may, because I've let you.
If we can't confirm your ID, you'll be under arrest.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, I've let you talk now. Can I talk?
Yeah.
Okay. My medical information is personal and private, and it's protected under the Privacy Act. And unless there's a public a biosecurity control order in my name as an individual, aside from my medical exemption, I'm not required to provide proof of medical exemption, and I'm not required to wear a mask, check in, quarantine, or isolate unless there is a biosecurity control order which supersedes the state, which supersedes all state, even Commonwealth legislation or laws that are in conflict with that biosecurity control order. Is that incorrect?
We need to confirm your ID. If we cannot confirm your ID right now, you will be under arrest.
But is that correct?
Are you willing to provide your ID? Are you willing to provide your ID? Otherwise, you will be under arrest.
For what purpose, though? What purpose? No. Can I put my phone in my pocket?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm happy. Can you just hold on for 1 second? Yeah, I'm putting my phone away.
Put your phone away.
Okay.
Go for it, mate.
Okay, just what time is it? I'm putting it away.
All right. So there's a fair bit to unpack here. So let's just get to it, ladies and gentlemen. Now, for whatever reason, maybe that police officer was a little bit confused and thought that she was that gentleman's local GP and that they were having some type of private medical discussion whereby discussing perhaps medical documentation may have been appropriate. So maybe she just forgot what uniform she was wearing and actually in that moment believed that she was a doctor, all right? So let's give her benefit of the doubt here. But anyway, all jokes aside, let's take a serious look into this. So the question that we need to be asking here is, are people on the street legally required to produce medical documentation for their reason behind not wearing a face mask? Are Victoria Police allowed to ask people to produce documentation? Let's have a look. We're going to answer those questions. All right, so what we've got here, ladies and gentlemen, is the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission. All right, I feel like I should be saying this in inverted commas, but anyway, just humor me for a second. Frequently asked questions, face masks and human rights. All right, so I've highlighted a few bits and pieces here. It says here, treating someone badly for not wearing a face mask due to a medical condition may amount to unlawful discrimination. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, what we saw in that footage, would you describe that as, quote, treating someone badly, as in giving somebody a fine after they have already declared they have a medical condition? All right, let's keep reading along here. But the plot thickens. Look at this. Issuing a fine to someone who is lawfully excused from wearing a mask would not be considered discrimination. Wait, what? So, treating someone badly if they have not wearing a mask due to a medical condition may amount to unlawful discrimination, but issuing a fine to someone who is lawfully excused from wearing a face mask would not be considered discrimination? Like, what? Are you serious? So let's keep reading here. It says, can Victoria Police fine me for not wearing a face mask even if I have a medical reason not to? Goes on to say, the Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities protects Victorians' fundamental human rights. Yeah, right. All right. Such as the right to equality and to live freely without discrimination. When considering whether to issue a fine, Victoria Police must consider your human rights under the Charter and act compatibly with them. Yeah. All right. So does public order response consider the human rights of protesters before smashing them into the ground? You know, I've got a mate of mine right now. He's recovering from a fractured spine after being arrested. I shouldn't even say arrested, being assaulted by public order response. So I wonder, at these protests, how often are the human rights of the protesters considered before these types of things happen? All right, so let's keep reading down here. It says, do I have to provide medical certificate to prove I can't wear a face mask due to my medical condition? The Department of Health and Human Services website says that you do not need a medical certificate to prove you have a lawful reason for not wearing a face mask under the public health directions, yet Victoria Police can still give you a fine and it's not considered discrimination. Isn't that convenient? Isn't that so convenient? It's almost as if these rules were made on purpose to target certain people. What do you think? Sounds kind of discriminatory, doesn't it? Anyway, let's move along here. So what are we looking at here? Human rights. All right, back to human rights. What is the Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities? The Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities is a Victorian law. All right, so it's a law. They admit that it's a law. So if Victoria Police try to claim that human rights are not a law, it says it's a law right here. It sets out basic rights, freedoms, and responsibilities of all people in Victoria. It's about the relationship between government and the people it serves. The people it serves. That's right. Remember that the government is supposed to serve us. The police is supposed to serve us. But I argue the police are not serving the people. They're actually serving the politicians that work within the walls of our parliament. Big difference. Very big difference. Goes on to say here, the Charter protects human rights in Victoria in three main ways. Public authority. I'm really struggling to read this with a straight face. You'll have to excuse me. Public authorities, including local government and Victoria Police, must act in ways that are compatible with human rights and take relevant human rights into account when making decisions. You mean like demanding that somebody shows their medical papers, and should that person refuse based on privacy grounds, arresting that person and issuing them with a fine? Were human rights taken into consideration for that bloke in the video? Yes or no? Answer the question. Human rights must be taken into account when Parliament makes new laws. New laws, I mean, when Parliament or a small group of Daniel Andrews and his colleagues decide that it's fair and reasonable to lock people in their homes to restrict people's movements? Were human rights taken into consideration there? Was it demonstrated beyond doubt that the measures, these draconian measures used by the government, are in some way proportionate to the risk of the Delta variant? My goodness, look at this. I mean, Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission, what are they even really doing there? That's another question that I have. All right, so moving along here, where are we? Coronavirus.vic.gov.au. We use authoritative sources here on the MCJ report, don't we? Face mask, when to wear one. All right, so let's just scroll down a little bit here. Says, I have a medical condition that prevents me from wearing a face mask. Do I need a medical certificate stating I don't need to wear a face mask? All right, this is straight from the government. You do not need a medical certificate stating that you have a lawful reason for not wearing a face mask. If you have a lawful reason for not wearing a mask, you do not need to apply for an exemption or permit. If you are stopped by police, all right, this is the part where Victoria Police start taking notes again. If you are stopped by police in a setting where face masks are mandatory, they will ask you to confirm the lawful reason you're not wearing a face mask. All right, that's fair enough. Now, don't get confused. Lawful reason doesn't mean divulging your personal medical condition. All it means is the reason. So what is the reason you're not wearing a mask? A lawful reason would be, I have a medical condition. If the police officer was to ask, what is that condition? Well, it's none of their damn business, so you don't have to answer that question. All right, in fact, there's a lot of instances where you don't need to answer questions. We're not going to get into that. I'm not a lawyer. And at that point, if a police officer asks to see your medical papers, they're completely out of line. It's not unlawful for them to ask, I don't believe. Just like I could, in theory, walk into the park and ask somebody to see their papers. That would not be unlawful, but it would just make me a complete arsehole, just a complete idiot walking around asking people for information that is frankly none of my business. Is that fair enough? All right, so there's that. So you don't need to produce the documentation. And this is kind of unrelated, but if you're wondering why so many Victoria Police officers just kind of don't look very fit and look like they would get puffed out after running 500 meters, it's because the acceptance standards in terms of physical capability were quite drastically lowered for Victoria Police. Anyway, that's kind of off topic. I just wanted to put that in because, why not? Anyway, moving back here, let's have a bit of a talk about it. This is my assessment here. So, according to DHHS, having a related medical or psychological condition is a lawful reason for not wearing a mask. All right, I think we all agree on that. Also, according to DHHS, those exempt from mask wearing are under no legal obligation to produce proof such as medical documentation. All right, that is also true. Assessment part 2. According to the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission, quote, treating someone badly for not wearing a mask could be unlawful. However, should Victoria Police issue a fine to someone lawfully not wearing a mask, that action would not constitute, quote, discrimination and therefore not be considered an act of, quote, treating someone badly, despite the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission acknowledging the policy of the Department of Health and Human Services. All right, let that sink in, ladies and gentlemen. They make all the rules. They decide what's discrimination and what's not. And it's crazy, isn't it? It's insane. It's just completely contradictory. All right, so I've got a bit of a conclusion here. I'm just going to move out of the way. All right, so conclusion. The Victorian Charter of Human Rights contains contradictions in relation to mask wearing. Victoria Police can issue fines to people who are lawfully not wearing face masks. That's right, it seems like they can. They can ask for medical documentation, which I don't believe it's unlawful for them to ask the question. Not saying it's right. It's a really horrible and rude thing to ask, but I don't believe it's unlawful. All right, but nobody is lawfully required to produce such documentation. I believe that's also true. It appears that Victoria Police have been empowered to use their own conviction when determining whether or not maskless persons are telling the truth in relation to exemptions. They have also been enabled to engage in what would usually be considered acts of discrimination. All right, so in other words, if a shop owner was to discriminate somebody based on their mask status, that could be considered unlawful. But should a Victoria police officer discriminate by singling somebody out, interrogating them, asking for their medical papers, and then issuing a fine or arresting them? Yeah, no problem. That's fine. That's lawful. Not discriminatory at all, according to the Victorian Human Rights? The Human Rights Commission? You kidding me? All right, so it says down the bottom here, and these are my words, I wrote this. The presumption of innocence has been replaced with the presumption of guilt. And this is a very dangerous road that we're heading down, ladies and gentlemen. The presumption of innocence is paramount to living in a civil society. And should we lose the presumption of innocence, I fear for the future of our country. Just imagine that. Just imagine a world where you're presumed guilty before innocent. I mean, it's at odds with the very foundation of our society. So hopefully Victoria Police is watching this show today. I know they like to watch the MCJ report. So maybe this officer, I don't know, maybe from higher up the chain of command, they need to send a few emails, tell their officers that although it's not unlawful to ask for somebody's medical papers, it's completely rude and unnecessary, and it's very unprofessional. Very, very unprofessional. I mean, how would they like it if we did that to them? If we just randomly walked up to Victoria police officers, excuse me, can I see your medical papers? You know, it makes no sense. Anyway,